I didn't even flinch when the HOA president stood up and shouted about my brother trespassing. She thought she had just caught us in some unforgivable act, as if the world revolved around the brittle lines on her little clipboard. I didn't correct her, didn't argue. I just slid a plain folder across the polished table. Inside was a sealed document with 3 letters stamped across the top in black FBI. I sat back and let her read. It took a good 5 seconds before her face went from red to gray. The lawyer beside her leaned in, saw the header, and muttered something under his breath. You could feel the entire room tilt. In that moment, I didn't need to say a word. Their entire sense of control evaporated with a single page. I never planned on finding myself in the middle of a feud with the homeowners association. I wasn't looking for drama, control, or neighborhood politics. My life had been moving in the opposite direction entirely. After years of noise, stress, and city living, I wanted something simple. A cabin by the lake, space to breathe, quiet mornings, where the loudest thing I'd hear was Colave Huron, skimming the water. My brother and I had talked about it for years, how we'd both grown up fishing with our grandfather, how it had been the only place where time felt like it stopped. When I finally inherited the place, tucked back at the edge of a subdivision that had slowly crept up over the decades, I thought I was reclaiming that peace. The cabin was old but sturdy, surrounded by pines, with a narrow trail that led right to the waterline. My brother would come up on weekends, and we'd fish just like we had when we were kids. I wasn't thinking about bylaws or boards or any of the absurd games people play when they don't have enough real power in their lives. I just wanted quiet. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a brightly colored notice slapped onto the side of my garage. It said I was in violation for having unauthorized structures. The structure in question, an aluminum fishing shed that had been there since the early 70s, long before the subdivision even existed. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then came the letters. Apparently, my visitors were not allowed to fish on common property. They claimed the lake belonged to the HOA. I had to read that twice. I dug out my deed, the one my grandfather had signed over to me. And sure enough, it included not only the cabin, but riparian rights to that entire stretch of water. I thought a simple conversation would clear it up. I was wrong. I tried the polite route. I wrote back, included a copy of the deed, and asked if we could schedule a meeting to sort things out. Weeks passed with no response. Then, another letter arrived, this one threatening daily fines if unauthorized parties continued accessing the lake. That's when my brother showed up one afternoon, badge tucked discreetly into his wallet, and said he wanted to cast a line. He's not the type to announce what he does for a living, and I certainly didn't volunteer it. To me, it was just 2 brothers fishing off the dock. But to the HOA, it was apparently a federal crime. They called 911. They told dispatch there were suspicious trespassers on private property. My brother and I didn't even put down our rods when the sheriff's deputy rolled up. My brother flashed his identification, said a few words I didn't catch, and the deputy left without another word. That was when it clicked for me. This wasn't going to be solved by reasoning with them. This was going to require precision, so I stopped sending emails and started pulling records. I went down to the county clerk's office and requested every plat map, survey, and land use filing from the last 50 years. I cross-referenced the HOA's boundaries against the original parcels. It turned out the HOA had no legal claim to the shoreline at all. In fact, the subdivision covenants explicitly excluded the lakefront parcels because they had already been privately owned before the HOA was formed. My grandfather's cabin was one of them. I pulled copies of the incorporation documents, the covenants, the zoning ordinances, and even state law regarding riparian rights. Then I started documenting every move they made. Every letter, every notice, every photograph of their so-called inspections. Nights that could have been spent on the dock with a beer were instead spent under a desk lamp, combing through statutes and case law. My wife thought I was going overboard until the fines started stacking up. They weren't just harassing me anymore. They were trying to drown me in paper. The isolation was the worst part. Neighbors who used to wave suddenly crossed the street. A few whispered that the board had told them I was trying to steal common property. My kids overheard at school that their dad was in trouble with the HOA. That stung more than any fight, But I kept my mouth shut and kept digging. My brother, who by then had become more involved, told me quietly that the HOA had no idea what they had stepped into. He never said much about his cases, but I knew enough to realize they had stirred a hornet's nest bigger than a property dispute. By the time the next board meeting rolled around, I had a binder thick enough to snap a bookshelf. That was the night I walked into the clubhouse.com as a stone and waited for them to accuse me of trespassing again. When they did, I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just slid that folder across the table. Inside were not only the property records and deeds, but an official notice connected to a federal investigation that my brother had been authorized to disclose. The look on the president's face when she realized she had called 911 on a federal agent conducting active work. That was a moment I'll never forget. The lawyer beside her went pale. The room went silent. All the smugness, all the petty power, dissolved right there under fluorescent lights. After that, everything unraveled quickly. The fines were withdrawn. The threats stopped. Within a month, the president had resigned. 2 board members followed. The HOA, which once strutted around issuing violations like parking tickets, suddenly had nothing to say. Neighbors who had avoided me started waving again, though some couldn't quite meet my eyes. My kids stopped hearing rumors. My wife finally got her quiet mornings back. And me, I got the lake, the dock, and the peace I had wanted all along. Now, when I drive past the clubhouse, sometimes they wave, sometimes they look away. Either way, I don't care. The water is mine, the cabin is mine, and the silence, that's mine too. It turns out the best revenge isn't raising your voice, it's letting the truth do all the talking. And in my case, it spoke louder than they ever imagined.